To start our quilt, the first thing we need to do is to find the right kind of fabric. This fabric has what looks like already quilt squares in it, and I like to use this for making dollhouse size quilts because it takes all the work of piecing your quilt out of the scheme of things. It makes it so much easier. And these squares are 1 inch by 1 inch. So that would translate to a real life quilt in 1/12 scale with 12 by 12 blocks. And I do a lot of quilting. I make quilts that size with that size blocks in them all the time. This fabric could also be used for a Barbie size quilt. Then they would be the equivalent of 6 inch by 6 inch blocks. You would just cut your quilt. You do the same thing I'm going to do here. You would just cut your quilt the size you needed. The quilt I'm making today will be a miniature twin size quilt. Now, a twin size quilt in real life can be anywhere from 65 by 88 inches to 81 by 107 inches, depending on who made it, what their design was. You know, it just depends on what they're doing. So I decided to make mine so it would be the equivalent of 72 inches by 96 inches. I did that for a reason. It's really easy to cut it. That means I want to have 6 whole blocks by 8 whole blocks. So I need to count over. I need to get out my scissors and I need to count over. Start on this corner. Here's 1 block, 2, 3. Now I've got a partial block here, and that's fine. That's going to be my seam allowance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I want to cut approximately down the middle of this row. We'll move over to the sewing machine pretty soon and we'll finish it. Now I'm going to actually trim off a little bit here so I don't have quite so much hanging off the end. Now I want to go 8 blocks, complete blocks. So a seam allowance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Whoops. Should have counted before I got set up. Alright, let's finish cutting and then we can go up some more. Alright, let's go ahead and cut this off. Alright, let's count this again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll go halfway across this one. Now we have plenty of seam allowance and we have our finished size here. Now I need to cut a piece of just plain white flannel to use in place of the quilt batting and a piece of plain muslin, which is what I use to back my real quilts with. So I'm going to cut those the same size as this. I'm going to iron this, and I'll meet you over at my sewing machine in a couple of minutes. Alright, so now we're at the sewing machine. I've cut out, we cut out our top, and I cut out the same size, a piece of white flannel, and a piece of just this plain muslin. They're the same size as my quilt top. So now I'm making a sandwich, and I'm putting the quilt top, the right side of it against the right side of the muslin, which is our backing, and the flannel is on the other side. This is wrong sides out because we need to sew it now. So now I like to pin it in a couple of places. I pin it in the corners, and I can really easily see my seam line, my seam allowance. My seam line is right on that design edge. And this doesn't have to be cut perfectly because the design of the fabric gives us our sewing lines. It's kind of crowded over here. It's a little harder to film at the sewing machine than where I normally work. And a couple more spots. Oh, one more. Alright, so now let's get my sewing machine over here. And hopefully you can see. Now we'll need to leave a space. In fact, let's pin that too so I don't forget. I'm going to leave a space on one end. I'm actually going to put my pins the other way to signal myself that that's my starting and stopping place. Now I put this under the sewing machine and I'm lining up just barely outside that seam allowance where I want it to be. I want to be just a smidgen outside so when I turn it, it looks right, so it shows the whole block. One mistake I see people do when they make miniature quilts is they forget to leave that little space. and then when they turn it, they don't have a full block on the outside. And that's important. All right, I'm going to drop my sewing machine down. I'm going to make it so. All right, no, that's not quite where I want it. I want a little bit inside of there. Just want to be a couple of threads outside this, the design line. There we go. All right. I'm going to make it so it stops with the needle down, because my machine will do that. And I need to get all the way to the corner of my design. Just barely outside. Now I turn it. And keep your needle down when you turn, that way you make a nice sharp corner. And we sew down this side. I make lots of quilts in full size too, in real size. I make quilts for beds, and I make wall quilts and pillows that are quilted and stuff, so I always have lots of fabric around. Right to the corner again. Oh, that needs one more stitch. That didn't end as nicely. I didn't like that either. Okay. There. I'm watching in my sewing machine foot so that I go nice and straight and right where I want to be. Pull out these pins. You want to be careful you don't hit your pins with your sewing machine needle, because you can mess up your timing on your sewing machine if you hit the needle, hit the pin with the needle. And you can also break your needle and bend your pins. All in all, it's a bad idea. So try to always pull those pins out as you come to. I like doing quilts this way because there's no matching. You're just following the lines on the back. All the work's been done for you. And now I'm coming back here. I've got a nice opening set aside, so I'm going to come up to where I want to stop. I'm going to tell my machine to knot the thread. Up. And I'm going to cut that. Let's move the sewing machine out so you can see a little bit better. Right now I've got a long thread, so I need to trim these threads. And at the corners, you need to cut across, not all the way to your stitching, but almost. You're going to cut a diagonal. Now, if your fabric is kind of heavy, you might want to trim the seam allowance. I'm not going to today, simply because I'm in a hurry and I want to get this done quickly. If I wasn't in a hurry, I'd probably trim this back. Now I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the iron. Let's see. I'll show you how to turn this first. And we need to turn this. We've left this opening here, and you're going to turn it so that you're turning right here. And see, you've got this opening. You can just pull it right side out, right through this opening. And now I'm going to use, for these blue knitting needles I use in my clay work all the time, I have some at the sewing machine too, because we need to poke these corners out. And because we trimmed them, there's not a lot of bulk. Okay. You see, because we trimmed and we were really careful, we have full blocks. I'm going to finish turning this. I'm going to go with my iron and I'm going to press it nice and flat, and then I'll show you how to do the quilting. Now we're all pressed, and you could really be done at this point. You could just fasten this shut. You could either sew this little opening by hand, or you could use the fabric tack glue that we've used before, which is probably how I'll fasten that shut at the end if I need to. But I am going to quilt it now. I'm going to quilt with my machine. When I make full-size quilts, real quilts, I do all my quilting by hand. But I can't get my stitches small enough to be satisfied with them on the machine, by hand. So I go with the machine for the dollhouse size. And remember, it's the same if you're going to use this for Barbie size. You would just cut it bigger. You could even make an American Girl size quilt or whatever size doll quilt you want to make. The process is the same that I'm showing you. So start here. And I've got my sewing machine set up, just a regular plain stitch, but I've shortened the stitch length a little bit. And you'll have to know your machine and figure out what size stitches you want. And I'm just going to follow these design lines, just like I did to sew the quilt. I'm going to sew down these design lines like that. So let's go across. And you have to go kind of slow. Normally when I sew a lot faster than this. But when I'm doing this, I want to stay right on that line, so I go slow and be careful. That's really all there is to it. It's just knowing how to sew a nice straight line. If this was a lot bigger, you might have to pin so that your bottom side wouldn't bunch up on you. But on this size, I find I don't need to. And right off the side. Now on the next one, I like to come from the other side. I like to go back and forth. I find sometimes if I do them all from the same side, it almost seems like the quilt gets kind of off shaped funny. So I find I like it better if I go back and forth. So now this time I'll go this way. You see I've got a fairly small stitch. I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but it's a pretty small stitch that I'm using. So I'm just going to continue like this and finish going this direction, and I'll be back with you as soon as I get ready to go the other way. Alright, so I just finished my last line of stitching. Now I'm going to go through and trim these threads. Because remember, where you turned your sewing machine around, you've got thread hanging. So you want to get rid of that. And now it's time to go lengthwise. We do the same thing. We're going to go back and forth on these lines. And that's all there is to it. Now we go up and down this way. And the same thing, I'm going to alternate direction each time I go. And I'll finish this up and I'll be back with you to show you the next step. I'm coming up to the very end of the last row, and there you have it. It's all done. Now, if I wanted to, I could go back and glue that shut, and I probably will. I'll probably just put a little bit of the fabric tack glue inside that opening so it stays shut. But it's optional. It depends on how you're going to display this. This quilt now can be laid, it could be laid out, it could be folded. If you want to display it on a bed, you'll need to dampen it and probably use some spray starch and some pins to make it fold down. But this one is really designed more to be folded and laid down. And in a second, I'll show you my optional extra step I'm going to do with this quilt. So I'll talk to you in a second. Alright, now for the totally optional part. For my scene, I want this quilt to look like it's really, really old and been kind of abused over the years. So I've been experimenting with some scraps, and I found a really cool method. I'm in my kitchen. I've got some coffee grounds. Now these are coffee grounds that haven't been used yet. These are fresh coffee grounds right out of the can. I'm using the cheap coffee though, not the good stuff. And then I had a little coffee left over from when I had coffee this morning. And I put it in the microwave and I heated up. When I took it out, it was boiling. This is really hot. In fact, it's still steaming. I don't want it near my fingers. Now I'm going to pour this over those grounds. The grounds will make just extra dirty spots. And pour this really hot coffee over your coffee grounds on your quilt. And let it sit. And I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes. And this is going to stain it. And you'll notice I made it really uneven. I don't want it even. I want it to be kind of mottled, like it's really old. And it's soaking through, so the back will be all stained too. Now this container has just some regular old-fashioned chlorine bleach in it. I'm going to dribble. I want to carefully dribble. And don't get this on your clothes. You'll ruin your clothes with either the coffee or the bleach, so be careful. Just some splashes. I want some splashes like it's, you know, this quilt's an old quilt. That's the whole idea. I want this to look really, really old. We're going to let this sit, and then we'll move to the sink, and we'll rinse it off, and we'll see what we've got. All right, so now we're at the sink. This is sat for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. You'll have to kind of check your fabric and see what it looks like. So let's rinse it off and see what we've got. As you can see, I think this is going to be really cool. It's got some dark spots and light spots. It's stained. This is exactly what I was looking for. Remember, this part is optional. If you don't want to make it look old, keep it looking new, and you've got a nice quilt. If you want a scene where you've got an old quilt, this is the way to go. Talk to you later. Bye.